Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this Toronto Raptors Draft Night Trades video, where we're going to continue what we've done all offseason long so far and discuss some potential trades we could see on Draft Night this year in the 2023 NBA Draft. Of course, the Raptors hold the number 13 overall pick, and potentially they could have even more draft compensation coming in if they look to make some trades out the door. But who knows, maybe they use pick 13 and make some big type of trade that I currently don't suspect. And I think that's a realistic possibility because Masai Ujiri did just buy at the trade deadline looking for Jakob Poeltl. Maybe he goes in that direction again a little bit further forward and looks to add a little bit more talent to this already existing team. It is a potential pathway for Toronto to explore. If you guys are new to Utility Sports, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe to the channel too for more content like what you see here in this video if you do enjoy what you see and hear. And then also hit that notification bell. Lets me know I'm doing a pretty good job here. I can see who has notifications turned on. Over 2,000 of our subscribers actually have notifications turned on, which is absolutely mental. Huge shout out to you guys. So let's see if we can get that number up to 3,000 pretty quickly. Going on to our video preview, we're going to talk about Raptors potential trades, of course, and there's going to be 3 Pascal Siakam trades, 5 OG Anunoby trades, for 8 trades in total. But I don't want to discredit the possibility of buy now trades. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I canvassed the league. I looked across every single team, all 29 other teams outside of Toronto. I looked at Toronto's current needs, some of the things that could fit. Of course, shooting, one of the massive elements that this team is currently lacking from behind the three-point line. I just couldn't really land on like a trade that made a lot of sense for Toronto, whether that meant giving up pick 13 or giving up other assets. The fact that they already owe that 2024 first for Jakob Poeltl, it just made it really hard for me to find a trade that I liked for this team, one that I thought they could build around and make a good addition, especially given the contract status on their current roster. You'll see a tweet pop up now from myself on Twitter saying that essentially there's no one under contract on this Raptors team over the next 3 years. They basically could clean the house if they wanted to. There's a lot of potential pathways this team could take. And there is one thing I do want to say. Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby are fantastic players. Pascal Siakam, 4th year in a row, averaging at least 20 points per game. He's been an All-NBA team member multiple times, and he's a very good basketball player. A lot of people floating out trades around him. I just don't really think that they understand quite how good of a player he is. So in this video, you might say, well, that's not enough value for Pascal Siakam. You have to remember, trades, sometimes you just don't get the value you think you deserve for a player. I tried to be about as fair and accurate as possible, but remember, pretty much any single time a trade happens in the NBA, people react with, well, that was a clear winner, that was a clear loser in the deal. So in some of these mock trades, you might feel that way as well. That's pretty realistic to what actually happens in the NBA. Then OG Anunoby, another very good basketball player, never been an all-star, averaged 17 points a game this year. He's kind of hovered around that 15 to 17 point per game mark. The biggest thing is he played over 60 games this season, which was different from the past few years for himself. And he was actually voted as an all-defense team member this year, which was well-deserved. He's a fantastic defender and a guy who, if you're looking for 3-and-D wings, he's kind of the epitome of it, him and Mikal Bridges. And with how Bridges performed to end the season for Brooklyn, maybe there's quite a bit of value around the league for OG Anunoby and what he could bring. So I do think that that plays itself into a situation where we might see OG Anunoby's value kind of rise a little bit. And there's going to be some discussion about top 10 picks in this draft potentially being traded for him as well. So when we get to that, we'll talk about the value of those picks versus some of the other trades I have laid out for OG at this point. So trade number 1, here we are now with the sell moves. Remember, we're going to start with Pascal Siakam and follow it up with OG Anunoby. And that first move that we have is actually a trade with the Portland Trailblazers. I think this is a very commonly proposed trade. I think a lot of people see the writing on the wall here as to why this maybe makes sense for both franchises and the way that they're both looking to operate. Now, I do have some questions about if Portland's actually going to be willing to make a move like this because Pascal Siakam is entering the final year of his deal. Now, they did something similar last offseason. They traded for Jeremy Grant as he was entering the final year of his deal. Could they potentially look to do that here around Pascal Siakam, who is significantly better than Jeremy Grant and is just a flat-out good player who has been All-NBA? Is this the type of build-around star you need next to Damian Lillard? And I could see Portland theoretically speaking themselves into it, which is pretty rare to see a team that finished 13th in the Western Conference trying to make a win-now move. But that's maybe what we will see this offseason. Pascal Siakam, probably one of the, if not the best available players this offseason. I'm not even sure how available he is. I think out of all the players that you could realistically see, though, just given his contract situation, it's a possibility. Now, one thing I do have to mention, Pascal Siakam and Jakob Poeltl do have a very good relationship together. So there's some speculation that since Jakob Poeltl was brought back to Toronto, maybe it's a move to keep Pascal Siakam not only happy, but interested in staying in Toronto long term, which I don't want to discredit that either. I think that is a realistic possibility. But let's break down the actual proposition here and why this trade does make sense from Toronto's perspective. We obviously know Portland trying to win. That's a good reason to make this move. Now, if you're Toronto, you're getting Anthony Simons, who so far I don't think you could classify him as a winning player up to this point. I think there's a little bit too much pressure put on young guys to quote unquote impact winning. Anthony Simons, it might take a couple of years for him to really figure out how does his game fit into a winning perspective. And he needs just flat out good defensive players around him. That's something he's just never had in Portland. Damian Lillard's never had that, but he's actually been able to win because he's such a good talent. Anthony Simons, I think, a little bit lesser talented, but still a good player and somebody that in the right system with the right pieces around him could, I think, positively impact winning because he puts the ball in the hoop. Very tough thing to do. You also get two young guys, Keon Johnson, who is a former lottery pick, or former high pick, excuse me, not lottery pick, but former first round pick, who the Clippers drafted and then traded him ultimately to Portland in the Robert Covington, Norm Powell deal. He gets rerouted here now to Toronto, where we've seen the Raptors and Blazers actually work out deals in the past. You think about the Gary Trent, Norm Powell flip from a few years ago. Of course, now new executives in Portland with Joe Cronin, but he was in the organization back when that trade actually went down. So, you know, they know each other's extensions for the office phones, that's for sure. Jordan Watford, he gets attached to your face-up four. I actually like him quite a bit as a player. I think he's an underrated piece in this deal. He was really good at LSU, and I think some of the things he did well at LSU, he's actually excelled at as well in the NBA. Now, I'm not saying he's a starting level player, but I think, you know, 8th, 9th guy, pretty solid piece. But then really the big asset, the one that really opens the door for this becoming a possibility is pick number 3. And if you would have asked me 2 months ago, I would say, yeah, that's going to be probably Brandon Miller. With Charlotte landing the 2nd overall pick, there is a lot of speculation right now that maybe, just maybe, the Hornets select Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson, which I think is an interesting idea. I wouldn't necessarily back it myself. If you look at the history of the 2nd overall pick, it's not something that you want to take off a fit. You'd rather just draft off of pure upside and talent, because there's a lot of guys that go 3rd overall then in that instance, and they end up being better than the 2nd overall selection oftentimes. But I think realistically, there's a pathway that Scoot Henderson could be available for Toronto. And if that's the case, you, I think, do make this deal. And I know people are going to say, well, Siakam's not better, or, you know, Siakam's way better than Scoot. And yes, currently right now, yes, Siakam is a better player than Scoot Henderson. The issue, though, is you look at Toronto and you say, okay, you guys were just the 9th seed in the East. Where is this team going to go? Pascal Siakam's about to turn 30 years old. What's the timeline for the next 2-3 years around Scotty Barnes, who is the player on your roster that you would classify as the build-around guy, the guy that you see being here in the organization for the next 4, 5, 6 years? Realistically, it's hard to see how they go about building around him when Fred VanVleet's a free agent, Gary Trent Jr. is a free agent this offseason, Pascal Siakam could be a free agent next offseason, Jakob Poeltl's even a free agent this offseason, but I'm assuming they keep him around just given the fact they just traded for him. Realistically, Scoot Henderson's the one that fits the timeline a lot smoother around Scotty Barnes, and I think it moves Scotty Barnes back to a position of comfort as a secondary playmaker. I don't think Scotty Barnes is a point guard. I think he's a very good point forward, and I do think there is a difference between those two things, and the more playmaking, the more ball skills you have on your roster, the better, and that's why Scoot Henderson makes a lot of sense. You also get an intriguing shot maker with Anthony Simons. I think this is a really good scenario, to be honest, for Toronto, but let's say Brandon Miller is the guy that's available, because the Hornets, I'm not ruling out the possibility of Scoot Henderson. In fact, if you ask me right now, I think Scoot Henderson is the player they'll take 2nd overall, because Brandon Miller's been dealing with mononucleosis. I think he's going to be a little out of shape compared to playing shape, not overweight or anything, but I think if you had him on the basketball court right now for an individual workout, he would struggle a little bit more, given a little bit of weight loss and just some questions about where he's at physically right now due to mono. And because of that, I think it opens the door that Charlotte still will draft Scoot Henderson, which means if you're Toronto, would you do this if you get Brandon Miller? For me, I would be sitting in the GM chair, I'd be less willing to make that deal because I do prefer Scoot Henderson over Brandon Miller. But I think Miller is a good scorer. I think Miller's a good player. He's probably going to average 18 to 20 points a game for a decent stretch of his career. And getting him and Simons, I still think is an intriguing fit next to Scotty Barnes. And I do think that there would be some other moves that Toronto could then make. I wouldn't hate it. I'm going to say it that way. I wouldn't hate it, but I think I'd have a harder time trading Pascal Siakam because of how good of a player he is individually. Going into our second Pascal Siakam trade, this one's going to ruffle some feathers here, but we're actually sending him to the Brooklyn Nets to pair up with Mikal Bridges, who I referenced earlier on in this video. And if you're the Nets, you probably feel pretty good about your chances of winning pretty quickly if you bring in a good high-end player, an all-NBA caliber player, and that's exactly what you're doing with Siakam, who I think would be a really good fit next to Nick Claxton, Mikal Bridges, Dorian Finney-Smith if they decide to keep him, Spencer Dinwiddie, of course, and some of the other young talent that Brooklyn still has there as well. They've got a lot of nice pieces. And Toronto, what do you get here? This is kind of the let's retool and completely blow this thing up a little bit type of perspective where, hey, we're not getting a high-end draft pick this year. In fact, this year we're only getting picks 21 and 22, which is the Suns pick and the Nets pick respectively. But we are getting 3 additional firsts with those 2 first-rounders. So 5 first-round picks in total, which is massive compensation. And typically you look at the recent deals where a team receives 5 first-round picks or similar compensation to that. It's when the Nets traded Kevin Durant away. It's when the Jazz traded Rudy Gobert away. Typically, the team that receives all of those assets finds themselves in a pretty strong position afterward, especially with the flexibility that it opens up for them. Toronto finds themselves in that flexibility here. And Ben Simmons, it's an actual perfect money match, $37.8 million. Now, you do have 1 extra year of Simmons' contract, which is a negative right now with the way that Simmons has played, or even not played at times because he's not been on the court very much. It's a negative contract, which is why you're getting 5 first-round picks here. Probably would only get 4 first-round picks if Simmons isn't in the deal, but since he is, to make the money work, Brooklyn says, hey, we're not really losing anyone out of our core. We're just really upgrading Ben Simmons to Pascal Siakam, which is a big upgrade for them with the way that they want to play. And if you're Toronto, this is your opportunity to revitalize his career. And Masai Ujiri wants to be big, lengthy, switchable. Ben Simmons, at his best when he was healthy and actually impacting NBA basketball, was one of the best defenders on the planet. I 100% believe that. He was switchable. He could survive inside against bigs on occasion. Now, I don't think he's a center defensively. I don't think you want to use him as an anchor, but he was a fantastic on-ball point of attack defender, a good help defender as well, and really one of the more switchable players in the league. So with the way that Toronto wants to play, I could see Simmons fitting into that. Now, the question is the coaching staff, who's going to be the guy for Toronto, and I think that's going to maybe come into effect on what we see them look to do this offseason, and they're going to use that input from their coach to make a decision on which way they want to go. But Simmons, I mean, realistically, if Masai Ujiri wants to go that way and stay big and lengthy and switchable, Simmons does make some sense, and he can be an offensive organizer. Now, again, are you going to win a bunch of playoff series with Ben Simmons at point guard? Probably not, but the one thing I do think is you're already not winning playoff series. The Raptors have not won playoff series recently. They just haven't. I'm not trying to be harsh on the team, but it's hard to discredit why Ben Simmons would be that negative for Toronto if the question's about playoff winning, because the Raptors haven't done a lot of that anyway. I'm not trying to rag on the Raptors. It's just, for me, it's hard to see a real correlation why the Raptors shouldn't even look into this or why they should instantly discredit it. Yes, it does make you worse right now, but you get 5 first-round picks to get worse. That makes some sense to me. It really does. So this is the second trade. I do think that there's some legitimacy to this one, although, again, I wouldn't be shocked if nothing gets done here either. Trade number 3. This one is between the Rockets and Toronto Raptors, and this is something that we've heard kind of heat up a little bit more in recent discussions around the league. I think there's been more discussion about pick 4 being open for a potential trade for an established player, and this one's a little bit different. You think about pick 3 and what the Blazers ended up attaching to that. They threw in Anthony Simons, and pick 3 in this draft feels really good, especially to a lot of outside people, because there's really high-end talented players. Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, and Brandon Miller. Those are the likely top 3 selections. I think everybody knows that at this point. So because of that, pick number 4, which is what the Rockets have to offer, just intrinsically feels worse. Now, for me, I myself think Amen Thompson could be a fantastic player. And if you look at Masai Ujiri's history, what he likes, a 6'7" guard with really dynamic downhill force that can get to the rim at ease and really put pressure on the rim with his athletic profile, it fits what Masai Ujiri would potentially look to draft and look to add. You know, there's questions around Scotty Barnes and his ability to shoot when they drafted him. Didn't matter. Masai Ujiri knew what he was doing and drafted him. There's questions about Amen Thompson right now and his ability to shoot. I really think out of all the GMs in the league, Masai Ujiri is like the one that would be like, yeah, Amen Thompson's going to be awesome. And I 100% agree with that, because I do think Amen Thompson's going to be quite a good player if he's in the right situation. And it's not going to be a day one thing. Amen Thompson's not going to walk into the league and average 28 and 8. Okay, he's just not. He's probably going to have a kind of a rough first year, and there's going to be some adjustment period. But this is a player that I think Toronto, if they get their hands on, could be really interesting with. They also get pick 20 in this draft because, again, there's going to be this kind of narrative of, hey, pick 4 is significantly less valuable than pick 3, which is why I think pick 20 potentially got included into this. Then you also get Tari Eason, who I would love to get. If I was a team right now, I would be trying to do anything I can to get my hands on Tari Eason. The fact that he fell to 17 last year in the draft was unbelievably crazy to me. I think he's such a good young player, and I think he's going to have a really high impact. You also eat the contract on Jae'Sean Tate, who I think is a pretty negative player at this point of his career. And you get a high swing move on Usman Garuba. One thing that we've seen from Masai Ujiri when he's trading or moving off of established veterans like Kyle Lowry, for example, he wants to take some unproven young players who have some defensive upside. Did that with Precious Achiuwa when Kyle Lowry went to the Miami Heat. Usman Garuba is that example here in this deal with Siakam to the Rockets. And for Houston, the reason that this does make some sense, you send out Jae'Sean Tate's contract and you do give up some other contracts in the mix, but the reason you do that is it keeps you in the category of max slot, where you could still go out and sign James Harden, and they would actually have some leftover money to maybe sign 1 or maybe 2 other free agents, not even including their mid-level exceptions. So if they handle this right and they make the right moves, they could realistically add 3 or maybe 4 veterans this offseason with that mid-level exception in there too. So they'd be in a position where, you know, Pascal Siakam plus James Harden plus player X and player Y from free agency, maybe that's a Dylan Brooks, for example, and you still keep Jalen Green, you keep Alperen Sengun, you keep Jabari Smith Jr. Those are really your build-around pieces that are young. It hurts to give up Tari Eason, it hurts to give up pick 4, but it does really accelerate the process. And you might say, well, that doesn't really make sense for Houston. They were the worst team in the West this year. I 100% agree, but you have to remember Rafael Stone, their GM, probably has a little bit of pressure on him to try and win. Otherwise, Tillman Fertitta is probably going to let him go, and he's going to lose his job. So there's going to be some pressure, and that's usually when GMs make the most mistakes. And this probably would be a mistake for Houston, to be honest with you. But it's one that Toronto could take advantage of, and I do think it's a possibility, which is why I wanted to include it in this video. Not all of these trades are deals that I would make. I want to be very clear. In fact, most of them I wouldn't make. But I do think that they're potential options that would at least garner some discussion and would realistically be potential offers that Toronto could receive around Siakam. Trade number 4, we're going to transition here into OG Anunoby, and I think these OG Anunoby trades are all over the place. Some of them are going to feature some good young players and a couple draft picks. Some of them are going to feature a lot of draft picks. Some of them are going to feature the most a team can offer, which is very little. There's going to be a lot of discussions around OG Anunoby and what a potential trade looks like. This one here with the New Orleans Pelicans is one that I realistically could see Masai Ujiri consider, because you're essentially moving OG Anunoby into a younger version of himself while also getting some draft compensation. You're getting pick 14 in this draft, so the Raptors would then hold picks 13 and 14, the last 2 picks of the lottery. They get Dyson Daniels, who was pick number 8 last year, I think an intriguing wing. They have him listed as a point guard. I've never viewed him as a point guard. I think he's more of a connective passer and more of a cutter off the ball. He's not really going to do a lot with the ball in his hands except for maybe run some pick and rolls. I think he's capable of that. And he's lengthy. Again, if you're looking for Masai Ujiri to kind of keep this same, hey, 6'8", 6'9" lineup with a lot of perimeter defense and mobility and fluidity defensively, Dyson Daniels fits that. He's a fantastic defender. But really the main build-around piece here, Trey Murphy. He's the guy that makes this offer somewhat considerable for Toronto, because there's a real pathway that he becomes OG Anunoby 2.0, or maybe a slightly lesser version of OG Anunoby, but the potential's there. He's a fantastic young player out of Virginia. I was shocked when he went 19th overall in his own draft. I thought he was going to realistically go in the top 10 or top 11 of that draft is typically where I had viewed him. And I think if you flash back to it and you look at kind of how some of those careers have started to pan out, I think Trey Murphy holds a lot more value than some of the guys drafted above him. And for Toronto, it does make some sense because you're getting younger. You're making a 1-for-2 type of trade with OG Anunoby going out and Murphy and Daniels coming in. I think that the Raptors do need more depth. Now, this doesn't really solve a lot of the shooting. Trey Murphy is a very good three-point shooter, but OG Anunoby cashed in a ton of threes as well this year. But you do get some assets, right? You get that pick 14, which maybe you could turn into a Cason Wallace. Maybe you can turn that into a Keontae George. Maybe a Nick Smith Jr. if the draft falls right for you. And you also get a second-round pick next year from San Antonio, or from New Orleans, excuse me, which it would be the lower of the picks between New Orleans and San Antonio, which you'd have to assume New Orleans will be picking lower, even though Victor is going to be there in San Antonio. OG Anunoby to the Pelicans maybe makes him a contender, and a legitimate one at that. I think OG Anunoby for Toronto, it hurts to give up, but you're getting some good young pieces back in for New Orleans. It makes sense because you're kind of hitting the gas a little bit. You're stepping on the accelerator and saying, look, Trey Murphy, we think you're going to be awesome 2-3 years from now. We want something awesome right now. And that would be OG Anunoby, who I do think would significantly elevate where the Pelicans are currently at. They're a team that they're hungry. They missed the playoffs this season, which was a huge disappointment, especially with how they started this year. And I don't think that they necessarily need to make a trade like this, but I think that there might be some hunger in the organization to make a trade like this and consolidate the roster, consolidate some of the assets that they have into one stable player in OG Anunoby. If he's on the court, he's a perfect example of what I think New Orleans could realistically talk themselves into needing. Going into trade number 5, this is another high-end destination for OG Anunoby, the Memphis Grizzlies. This team is going to bid, and they're going to bid very, very hard for him. But the one thing that they don't have that some of these other offers possess is a lottery pick and some good young players to throw in there. Now, Santi Aldama and David Roddy, I think, are two solid young players. Santi Aldama is a very intriguing player because he's got really good height, but he's very fluid downhill, pretty good mover, and he's a smart player. I think that Santi Aldama is a very underrated player, and I think David Roddy is as well. He actually played quite a bit as a rookie for Memphis. I tried telling everyone last draft that he would play more as a rookie than Jake LaRavia, which is exactly how it played out. I think David Roddy had a significantly better rookie season than Jake LaRavia, and he just was flat out a good player for Memphis. And given his age and given his how young he was, he's 22. He's not like he's a baby out there, but he's a rookie, right? So there's going to be flashes, there's going to be moments where he's not good. But I think he had a pretty good year. You also get Luke Kennard to make the money work, and I think that's actually a really good get for Toronto because, again, this team's not been able to shoot the basketball. You get one of the best shooters in the entire league. Now, I know he's not going to be an absolute flamethrower when it comes to how many shots a game he's going to take. He's somewhat passive, doesn't take a lot of contested looks, but when he's open, he cashes them in very, very, very frequently. In fact, more frequent than pretty much anyone else in the league. And again, you're getting 4 first-round picks here. So you're getting pick 25, I believe it is in this draft at 2023 first. You're getting the Golden State Warriors first next year, with which who knows how they end up turning out, right? Draymond Green could opt out of his option and could completely shift the table on what that team really looks like. 2025 first unprotected from Memphis, and also a 2027 first unprotected. So the Raptors here, you're getting 4 firsts from OG Anunoby. So if you were to imagine, hey, maybe they take that Nets trade with Siakam and they take this trade with the Grizzlies for Anunoby, they have 9 first-round picks coming in the door over the next 5 to 7 years, which is absolutely mental, right? And it would completely reshape how this team looks, and they'd have a ton of picks. They'd be really well positioned to make bigger moves later and just draft well, and I think Masai Ujiri would do a great job with that. And from Memphis's perspective, not only are you likely not bringing back Dillon Brooks next year, but then you just have a question of who's our starting small forward and what's he going to do. I think one thing the Memphis Grizzlies have always been lacking is a perimeter defender with good size who can also knock down perimeter shots. And, Dillon Brooks, very good defender. He was all defense this year as well. OG Anunoby is just significantly better offensively. It's the difference between being a $13 to $15 million a year player, which is what Dillon Brooks is, and what OG Anunoby is a $25 to $30 million a year player, because offensively he's just so much better and there's so much substance to him that I don't even think he's gotten to show yet, that Memphis, they'd probably bet on that Mikal Bridges upside, that maybe he turns into a guy capable of scoring 20 plus a game, and he probably would next year for the Memphis Grizzlies, which would give them a really strong quartet between John Morant, assuming he plays, Jaren Jackson, Desmond Bane, and then of course OG Anunoby, which feels really good to me. Going into trade number 6 here, we look at a deal with the New York Knicks. This one I feel like is less likely, but I do think the Knicks, they have a lot of assets and they would at least explore this a little bit because Evan Fournier and OG Anunoby are nearly perfect dollar for dollar fits, only $200,000 difference between their contracts, and Fournier not really a part of the Knicks roster right now in terms of their lineup, what they actually like to put out there on the court. So you turn Fournier into OG Anunoby, it's a massive upgrade. It does cost you 3 firsts and 2 seconds to do it. They get rid of 2 seconds, one from the Detroit Pistons, one from the Miami Heat in 2024, which opens some flexibility for Toronto, who again, they owe their 2024 first currently to the Spurs. And then also from there, you not only add 1, but you add 2 first-round picks in 2024. So 4 picks next year in total, and a 2028 first from the Knicks, completely unprotected. It gives them a pretty good pathway of, hey, we're adding 3 firsts in here. Now you do take in Fournier's contract, which isn't great, but there is non-guarantees in that final year. So you can work your way out of this, and it does make some sense here for Toronto to at least consider this. Again, I don't think this offer is as strong as New Orleans or Memphis is, which is what the theme is going to be over the next couple of trades as well. But for the Knicks, it's a no-brainer to get OG Anunoby, and for Toronto, at least you're getting good draft compensation here. Again, not great, but good. And I think that this is a deal that does not get done. The Knicks have more to offer, but I think they'd be patient to offer that for something else out there. Now, maybe does this trade come up around an RJ Barrett? That's an interesting question. RJ Barrett, of course, Canadian. Would Toronto love to get him? Maybe that's a deal that we could discuss. I haven't really thought of that too much. When I thought about OG Anunoby to the Knicks, I didn't really consider RJ Barrett going back to Toronto until now. Now I'm kind of thinking about it. I kind of like it as a 1-for-1, or maybe there's some low-level compensation swap back and forth, whatever that would end up looking like. It's an interesting thought, but I think that this Fournier deal likely would not get done. But I do think that the Knicks, they'd be ecstatic if they got it done. I do think this would be an offer that they would realistically send, at least to try and get the deal done. Remember last year they did play hardball with Utah a little bit around Donovan Mitchell. So this is a realistic offer. It just doesn't mean it gets done, but we saw that same thing play out with Mitchell last year for the Jazz. Trade number 7, and this is kind of a homecoming for OG Anunoby, who played his college ball for the Indiana Hoosiers. And I think there's been a lot of rumors about this, with OG Anunoby potentially going to the Indiana Pacers after he whispered to Tyrese Haliburton. Some people speculate he said, hey, come get me. We're not sure if that's actually what he said or not, but it's a possibility. And I think the Toronto Raptors, if they did move him to Indiana, it would look something like this, where they get Isaiah Jackson. That's kind of their Precious Achiuwa return here, where they get an unproven young big who was a former first-round pick. I still think there's a lot in the tank that Isaiah Jackson hasn't been able to prove so far. He's a very good rim protector. I think he blocks a lot of shots. I think that's something Toronto needed before getting Jakob Poeltl. Now with Poeltl in the fold, it kind of complicates some of these deals, honestly, and it makes less sense for Toronto to actually trade away some of these players. But part of the reason you're doing this is you are getting pick 7 back in the deal, and you might say, well, this is significantly less draft compensation than what Memphis was willing to give up, and there isn't that proven young player in there like a Trey Murphy that New Orleans was giving up. That is 100% correct, and that's a very fair assessment, but those teams weren't offering top 10 picks. This is pick number 7 in a draft that has, in my opinion, 9 players who are potentially worthy of top 5 grades in a normal year. This is a very, very, very strong draft class, and Masai Ujiri might be licking his chops at the possibility of adding not 1, but maybe 2 top 10 picks where he already has pick number 13. If he were to make a trade with, say, the Portland Trailblazers around Siakam, and then this trade here with the Indiana Pacers around pick 7, he could potentially have picks 3, 7, and 13 in an absolutely loaded draft where maybe he walks out with Scoot Henderson, Taylor Hendricks, and Grady Dick. Or maybe Jordan Hawkins is one of those guys. Like, Toronto could have a really good, intriguing young team with a lot of talent. And I don't think it would be a bad idea to kind of reset the full around Scotty Barnes. Again, I'm not saying that they need to 100% do that, but pick 7 is a good asset. And I know some people are going to be instantly turned off and say, we don't trade OG Anunoby to do that. I 100% understand that point. This has to be kind of a feel thing of, does OG Anunoby want to actually leave the organization? And if so, does pick 7 make up a good portion of that value? Possibly, right? Maybe Jarris Walker is a guy that Toronto could fall in love with. There's other options out there. Anthony Black, I think, would be somebody that Masai Ujiri would really like as well. And then look at the 2026 first, unprotected from Indiana. You never know how things could go. You would project Indiana would be pretty good still at that point, but with how crazy player movement is in today's day and age, you never know. Maybe that's a top 5 pick somehow, just because things are wild and you just can't really project where a team's going to be 3 or 4 years from now. Even when you think it should be obvious, it rarely ever is. I think the great example of that, Brooklyn Nets with Kyrie, Harden, and Kevin Durant. People thought that team was going to maybe win 3 or 4 titles in a row, and they won one total playoff series while Kevin Durant was in Brooklyn. So pretty crazy how things go. Trade number 8, we look at the deal here with the Dallas Mavericks, and this deal is fairly competitive with that Pacers offer, but I do think it is significantly worse still. And I think the whole point of including this, I myself am a Dallas Mavericks fan. This deal is not going to get done, okay? OG Anunoby is not going to be a Dallas Maverick. I know there's going to be rumors out there and people are going to float, oh, well, Dallas would love to have him. I'm sure they would. All 30 teams in the league would love to have OG Anunoby. I included this deal to kind of prove to people that compared to the other offers that are semi-realistic or fairly realistic for OG Anunoby, this is basically what the Dallas Mavericks could offer. Now, maybe instead of Davis Bertans, it's Tim Hardaway Jr. I'm going to tell you right now, that doesn't move the needle very much for Masai Ujiri. It doesn't. What moves the needle is maybe pick number 10, which is what they're offering here. A 2027 first unprotected, and the only reason that would move the needle is because Masai Ujiri would probably look at the team and say, yeah, it's probably likely that Kyrie Irving could either leave or Luka Doncic could probably just ask out of Dallas, which is a realistic possibility at this point. Jaden Hardy's really the young player that Dallas would have to offer. Now, some people are going to float out Josh Green. I understand that, but if you're Dallas and you're trying to win, you just can't afford to really give up Josh Green at this point, in my opinion. It hurts to even give up Jaden Hardy because the Mavericks are so void for young talent. They just don't have any outside of Hardy and Green, so even giving up Hardy really hurts. But he was a second-round pick a year ago, but I do think he flashed quite a bit in his first year in the league. Now, I liked him a lot last draft. I had him as a guy who should have been a lottery pick in terms of talent. I feel pretty vindicated with how he performed this past year when he was actually on the court. Now, don't get me wrong, Jaden Hardy has a long way to go in terms of impacting winning. I think it's going to be more of that Anthony Simons trajectory of, hey, he's got the skill set, he's got the ability with the ball in his hands, but how does that actually translate to winning games? And is he a good enough player to be a high usage guy, or does he have to be a kind of a bench spark plug? What does that really look like? I think Hardy's going to take a similar route to that, but the skill is there. He's somebody who can put the ball in the hoop. And if you're Toronto, can you sell yourself on Hardy, pick 10 in an unprotected first from a very volatile franchise that might collapse in the next year or two? That's really what you're asking yourself. Again, I don't think this deal gets done. The Mavericks, it's a pipe dream for them to get OG Anunoby. It 100% is. But at the end of the day, I don't really see it happening. I would be shocked if OG Anunoby's in Dallas next season. So for buy now moves, remember this team has some assets that they could potentially move off of. They have pick number 13, pretty valuable pick this year. They have Delano Banton out of Nebraska. He hasn't played a ton in the NBA, and when he has, it hasn't always been pretty, but he's had some really great G League tape where he's absolutely dominated in the G League, and he's been a high upside player. I think a lot of teams around the league would have him circled as a guy that if he became somewhat available in a deal, they would want him included in a package. And I know there's a cult following around Delano Banton right now. Trust me, I'm one of the leaders of that cult following. I love Delano Banton's game. I think with his size, playmaking capabilities, and his ability to score going at the rim, I think Delano Banton could still be a good player. So that's an intriguing player that you could throw into an offer. Precious Achiuwa, another name that could make some sense there. And you also have contracts like Otto Porter Jr., who opted into his player option, Chris Boucher around $12 million, and Thad Young at $8 million, that you could get the money up to around a $30 million player if you so desire. With pick 13, Delano Banton, Precious Achiuwa, and some of those contracts thrown in, the money's there, right? You could make a big win now move if you're Toronto. The question is, do you want to do that? And I couldn't really settle on anything I love, to be honest. Again, I canvassed the league. I just couldn't find anything that I said, look, this either definitively makes Toronto significantly better, or this makes sense for the other team to actually do. I thought about maybe Karl-Anthony Towns in Minnesota. I thought about maybe Damian Lillard in a complete change of events going to Toronto. I thought about pretty much everything. I thought about sign and trades Kyrie Irving to Toronto. I thought about D'Angelo Russell to Toronto, and I almost threw up in my mouth because D'Angelo Russell's terrible, and I don't think the Raptors or Masai Ujiri would want anything to do with him. I don't know. I couldn't really land on anything. I just really could not. And because of that, I just have some issues with realistically seeing how Toronto would buy. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. So please comment some buy now moves down in the comment section, because maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe there's a player or a team that does make some sense as a potential conversation starter. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Remember, trades, it's really hard to come up with the perfect trade and exactly what's going to happen. I think I've had some really accurate ones in the past, and I think I've been way off on some in the past. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in general, not only about these buy now moves, but what you thought about some of these trades throughout the video. I hope you guys really did enjoy. Thank you all so much for watching this video. It means a lot to me having a really nice support group of people who just love to talk about basketball. If that's you, I would recommend checking out our Discord down in the comment section, or in the description, excuse me, because in there you could join our Discord and just talk about hoops. There's a lot of people in there, about 100 people that just love to talk about basketball. Like myself, I'm very active in there. I know a lot of other users are as well. So check that out. Make sure to leave a like on today's video, subscribe to the channel for more, hit that notification bell, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.